I guess you might call it innovative mindset by asking myself the question, can something be done better?
He really goes into all the potential risks, including death.
We got it out, he's fine.
Thanks to Dr. Carson's skill and faith, he's here today.
Welcome to Celebrate Life. Today's program is about a very special man with gifted hands. Dr. Ben Carson is a world-famous pediatric neurosurgeon. He specializes in working with children nobody else will help. Gentle Ben, as his fellow surgeons and patients call him, is a true physician. He knows his talents are a gift from God to be used for his glory and honor. In 1986, Dr. Carson performed the first successful brain surgery on a baby in the womb. This helped open the world's eyes to the humanity of every preborn child. As a physician, husband, and father, Gentle Ben is one person making a big difference in the lives of many others.
Well, the thing that is most gratifying for me is to be able to take a child, a family that is devastated by some horrible neurological disease over which they have absolutely no control, and to be privileged by God to play a role in helping to defeat that disease process and restore that individual to a semblance of normality, if not to complete normality, and to restore hope and happiness to that family. Now, whether that be taking out a brain tumor or operating on some congenital malformation or intervening in some significant trauma, trying to get rid of seizures, whatever the case is, it is just as gratifying if the end result is to allow that individual an opportunity at a fuller life. And, life is not something that we as human beings are able to give, but certainly the Lord has blessed many of us with the talent to be able to preserve it through Him. In the case of Lisa Wackersback from Texas, she, at the age of less than 1 year, was involved with intractable seizures, had multitudinous medical interventions, polypharmacy, and absolutely nothing was working. And besides that, she was so doped up from the medication that she was non-functional. So in a situation like that, I personally felt there was very little to lose, although no one was willing to do anything, and that's how she came to our attention. It turned out that we were, in fact, able to go ahead with a hemispherectomy in her case. Hemispherectomy is an operation in which we basically remove the hemisphere on one side of the brain. And this is only done in situations that are desperate, obviously. We would much rather go with more traditional types of therapy. However, when the situation is totally intractable and the seizures have multiplied to the point where they are destructive to a person's lifestyle, then we feel that that type of radical intervention is warranted. It was a spectacular success. She's walking around and talking and doing well in school and looks like $1 million, and obviously is not having any seizures. Now, if it had not been successful, we probably wouldn't have been any worse off than we would have been had we done nothing. So, as a consequence, a life is saved. A precious life is saved and has an opportunity to blossom and accomplish things in life as well as make other people happy. So, for anyone who would question going into such a serious surgical procedure in someone who appeared to be relatively lifeless, all they need to do is look at that example. I am not at all reckless in evaluating these cases, and I study them very carefully. I pray about them, I ask God for wisdom, I read the literature, I seek consultation from others with experience. If I can see some mechanism whereby something can be accomplished that might lead to a good outcome, then I'm willing to take it on. Only God has that breath of life. Only He can create that spark which gives us life. And therefore, I feel obligated as a physician, someone who has taken the Hippocratic Oath, someone who feels as though he's gifted from God, to do everything within my power to save that spark. That's the reward that one gets. The fact that you know deep in your heart that you played a role in preserving that spark of life which only God can give.
Suppose there was a choice there to pull the plug or to remove my life because it was no longer a superstar life of running down a football field and using my talents. Well, you don't grow up hoping to be a wheelchair athlete. However, there are a lot of things that we can do with life when given the opportunity.
It's not, of course, an easy thing for an entertainer to swim against the tide and against all the opinion in his industry and take a strong pro-life stand. It's the parents' responsibility to teach kids how to be pro-life, how to get things in perspective.
Dr. Ben Carson is a shining example of the medical profession. He's a man blessed with exceptional talent, and he is faithful to his sacred calling as a healer. But Dr. Carson and thousands of others are concerned about ethical problems in the field of medical care. All About Issues carried a special report entitled, "What's Happening to Medicine?" I'd be happy to send you a free copy. Just call or write American Life League.
It really doesn't matter where you come from. It really doesn't matter what you look like. You can pretty much do anything that you want to do. And I'll use myself as an example of that. When I was 8 years old, my family was broken up. My father left us. And my mother, who only had a third-grade education, was left with the horrible task of trying to raise 2 young sons in inner-city Detroit. My mother was working 2 and 3 jobs at a time, trying to stay off of welfare and to get back on her feet. I was in the 5th grade, and I was a terrible student in the 5th grade. Just, you cannot imagine a worse student than I was. I was always the first person to sit down when there was a spelling bee. I never knew any state capitals. I didn't even know the states, much less the capitals. I got every question wrong when it came to a math quiz. And, I didn't really think much of it. As far as I was concerned, that was just the way it was supposed to be. when our report cards came out, my mother was quite alarmed when she saw mine because I was failing just about everything. And she said, "What in the world is going on? What can I do here?" She was really quite distressed because she had led a very difficult life herself. And she said, "There must be some way I can stimulate my sons to learn because my brother wasn't doing well either."
My sole purpose was for them to get an education so they can get a decent job, because I could not find one without an education. And then I just really asked God to show me a way that I could motivate them. And then this plan came to me. Let them learn the timetables. I had heard that, and I had really studied myself because I was trying to upgrade myself too. And then I said, okay, we're going to learn the timetables together. The second day came back, I said, how are you done on the timetables? And so Ben wanted to go outdoors and play. He said, "Mother, you are a mean mother. It's impossible. Can't nobody learn those timetables. Can't nobody in the world learn those timetables." I said, well, okay, you can figure out. You're smart. You can figure out how to learn them. And so let's say that you are going to not play until you learn your timetables. And a very short time he learned them, all the way from 2 through 12.
You know, we were the kind of kids who wanted to come home and play outside until it was dark, and then when it was dark, go in and watch TV until it was time to go to bed, and then that was that. She said we would be able to watch 2 or 3 pre-selected TV programs during the week, every week. And with all of that extra time, we had to go to the library, check out 2 books, read them, and submit to her a book report. See, my mother was a very, very persistent person. Well, interestingly enough, after a few weeks, I began to enjoy reading those books. I didn't like it much at first, but you know, the books I started reading initially were about animals. I loved animals. And then I started reading about rocks and minerals, and I really got fascinated with rocks. And one day we were in science class. I was still in the 5th grade. And the science teacher held up a dark, glassy rock. And he said, "Does anybody know what this is?" And, you know, I didn't put my hand up because I figured one of the smart kids would answer the question. And I looked around and nobody had their hand up. And I said, well, I knew what it was. You know, I'd been reading about this stuff, so I put my hand up. And everybody looked. Is that Carson with his hand up? You know, the teacher looked, they said, and the students were all, you know, they were taking a big breath. They were getting ready for a hilarious laugh. They knew it was going to be funny what I had to say. And I said, "That's obsidian." And the teacher said, "That's right. It is obsidian." And then I went on to explain how obsidian was formed by lava, and how when the lava flowed down to the water, it was supercooled and the elements consolidated and they formed a glass-like appearance. And everybody was spellbound as I was talking about it. You know, this was a totally new experience for me. The reason I knew that is because I read about it. And I started reading every book I could get my hands on. And within a year and a half, I'd gone from the bottom of the class to the top of the class.
I am a woman that had an abortion, so I speak from a personal experience. And I think that there was just never a time in my mind and in my heart where I felt this was truly a human being until I got into the Word of God and I read where David says in the Psalms that before he was even born, God had known him in his mother's womb. And even Jeremiah spoke about the fact that he had already been designated a position that God had for him. And at that particular time, life became very, very real for me to know that God knows us even in the womb of a mother. I've thought about what that child could have been, what I could have been to that child, and what I'll have to say when I stand in front of the Lord one day to answer for that. We must, without a shadow of a doubt, choose life. And I ask you to come together to choose life.
I guess when all the media hype started coming along, I started becoming pro-life, but I always was pro-life.
I would not have an abortion. I would I might give the baby up for adoption, but I would keep it because I believe it's human life.
You shouldn't kill unborn babies because they have a life too.
Using abortion as birth control is so wrong, you know.
My dollar gets pushed down.
The inspiring work of Dr. Ben Carson is a light in the darkness. He shows us what the healing profession can be and what it ought to be. But there are compromises and ethical problems today in the field of medicine, and you should have the facts. American Life League has published a special booklet on medical ethics. I'd be happy to send you a free copy. Just call or write American Life League.
There are a lot of different types of Siamese twins. Now, the type that are joined at the back are the rarest and most complex type. This is what the Bender twins were from West Germany. And this is the type that had never before been separated and with both twins surviving. And that gives you a very good view of how extensive the connection was that the two of them had. The first time I saw these boys, I was in Germany, and one of them was sleeping, and the other one was sucking on a bottle. And it was really quite an eerie phenomenon to see them for the first time. Now here you can see them from another vantage point. You can see that there's some flattening here because this is where they tend to lay most often. When we went over to Germany, we put in a scalp expander, which is like a little balloon. And then it has an area that you can stick a needle through the skin into this area and put saline into that, which gradually expands this. So each week the doctors in Germany would put a little more fluid into that thing, and it would get bigger and bigger, so that once we separated them, we would have that extra scalp which we could cover the back of their heads with. You have to plan those kinds of things when you get involved in very complex surgical procedures. This is what the operating room looked like just before we did the operation, and you can see there's a tremendous amount of equipment in there. And of course a lot of people had to be in that operating room as well. And that's just before we started the operation. And that's the operation actually underway. But eventually, after 22 hours of operating, we had two separate individuals. They were quite sick post-operatively initially. And you can see one of them there in the intensive care unit. And later on, they started making much more progress. You can see that they were not suffering from any lack of nutrition. And that's the end of that. Now, these are kinds of things that people can do. People like yourselves can do. These operations, they seem incredible. The technology seems very sophisticated. It seems like you need an incredible amount of knowledge. And you do. You do need an incredible amount of knowledge. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is you all have incredible brains.
Our young people a lot of times don't have the role models that they could have in academics and in helping your brain to expand. And the idea that just do your best no matter what, and see how far you can go. When you're a mom, it's very important to nurture those children because they're tomorrow's future. It's just important to instill a lot of those ideals early on in life, and also to give them a sense of security as well, so that when they're bombarded with a lot of temptations and some of the terrible vices that are around these days, that they'll be able to stand up and say no, that that's something that they don't want to do.
How can a person learn fatherhood skills growing up without a father? Well, I have to tell you, in my case, I did an awful lot of reading. And I'm a great student of the Bible, and particularly the book of Proverbs, which has a lot of verses in it about how to raise children. And I think the wisdom is there for anybody. So not having a father, not growing up that way, was no disadvantage to me. I chose to find appropriate mechanisms for acquiring the knowledge. and the skills for appropriate fatherhood. I could have sat there and said, no, nobody ever taught me, and I never had a good example, so I guess I'm just not going to be a good father. But I chose not to do that.
I would not have been born had it not been for the convictions of a doctor. My mother found herself carrying a child at age 41. No husband, no job, no hope, no future. Tried to have an abortion. The doctor said no. Miraculously, I was allowed to be born. God had a plan for me. Somehow we've got to instill morality and virtue into the minds and hearts of people, and we can do it together.
The integrity of the healing profession dates back to Hippocrates. Over the centuries since his time, doctors everywhere have sworn his oath always to protect life, never to take it. Today, however, the practice of medicine is in crisis. Most medical schools have abandoned the Hippocratic Oath because medical practice is no longer limited to healing. Dr. Ben Carson is a living example of a doctor who has remained faithful to the healing principles. He shows us how medicine ought to be practiced. But the darker side of the profession needs to be examined too. We need to carefully select the doctors and hospitals we use and support those who, like Dr. Carson, are faithful to their sacred calling. To exercise our responsibility as patients, we need to arm ourselves with the facts. All About Issues carried a special report titled, What's Happening to Medicine? For your free copy, just call or write American Life League.
Sean woke up this morning, he's got a cold.
You know we have a camera crew today, don't you?
Right.
Okay. I have a few heroes in life. One of them is Norma Claypool. This is one of the most spectacular women in the world as far as I'm concerned. She is willing to take children that nobody else wants as long as they're alive. Children who are blind, children who have incredible craniofacial deformities, who have other types of physical handicaps. And she brings them into her home, and she loves them. And they know after a while that she loves them, and they begin to respond. And she takes them wherever she needs to take them to get the appropriate medical treatment, including all types of surgeries to correct some of the physical deformities. And she takes multiple children in at one time and raises them until they're independent. And to top all of that off, she's blind. But she doesn't know it. They don't know it. You know, as far as she's concerned, she's not handicapped. And she looks at her blindness as an advantage, as something that allows her to be more in tune with the feelings of these children. And she is a splendid example of someone who has chosen not to be a victim and who has chosen to help others who are.
This little guy on my lap is a priceless little boy who rewards you all the time. Jamin never complains. If Jamin cries, there's something extremely wrong. He's come through so much without complaining about it. Thanks to Dr. Carson's skill and faith, he's here today, sitting on my lap. He operated on him a year ago in June and really took his whole skull apart, put it back together. Jamin was born with a very, very deformed head. It's hard to believe that now, but you had to see the before to know the after.
There are many physicians who hold life up as the most precious entity. And there are others who look at life as a business and who look at dollars and cents when it comes to whether a life is worth preserving or not. My philosophy basically is if we look at everything in terms of dollars and cents, then there are going to be an awful lot of people that you're going to say it's not worth saving. That's because most people don't know the value of a human life. And they just look in terms of, well, if we don't treat this one for $100,000, maybe we can treat 10 over here for $10,000. And I really don't think you can play that kind of a numbers game.
A lot of doctors wouldn't have thought that they would have been worth being bothered with. I mean, I had to fight in the beginning to get Jamin a gastrostomy tube, a feeding tube in his stomach, just because a lot of people felt that it wasn't worth the time or the money for a child who was going to die anyway.
You know, the children that Norma takes care of and other children like that are precious lives. For the same reason that I'm willing to fight for a child with intractable seizures who might be lying as a lump like Lisa Wackersbach was, I am willing to fight for these children with these incredible deformities because there is a life there and there is someone who loves them. And those are the most important ingredients, life and love.
Dr. Carson is a real inspiration to the rest of the medical world. His surgical skills are only surpassed by his integrity as a true physician. While many in his field have lost respect for preborn children, the severely handicapped, and the very old, Dr. Carson still practices the sanctity of life ethic. If you know doctors or others in your community who will be inspired by Dr. Carson, just call or write us. We'll send you a free transcript and information on how to obtain a low-cost video copy of today's program. Sharing this story with others can help make a difference for life. Thanks for watching Celebrate Life. I trust this program has helped inspire and encourage you. See you next week.
You know, the technical skills, the knowledge, those are things that can be acquired. But I believe wisdom comes from God, and it has to be sought and asked